Welcome to Clarity and Brevity. We've been talking about the fifth gospel with Andrew Abernethy from Wheaton College. Dr. Abernethy's written a lot of books on Isaiah. This is one of them, the book of Isaiah and God's Kingdom. And today we're going to talk about some of the themes that hold Isaiah together and how those can point us ahead to the New Testament and the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, Andy, welcome back to the channel.
Hey, great to be back on with you today, Brandon.
So we talked in a previous video about some of the ways to read Isaiah. Can you talk about some of the big themes, maybe about kingship that you've written on here and how that can help us understand the coherence of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about the book of Isaiah, it was largely written during a time where there are major empires on the horizon that a little country like Israel, Judah are dealing with Assyria and Babylon on the rise. And I think one of the fundamental visions that the book of Isaiah gives us is a recognition that God himself is the king over it all. Not to be kind of thinking that Assyria and Babylon are stronger than God, but God is over it all. And this comes into view in Isaiah 6 especially, where you have the call of Isaiah and it opens with, I saw the Lord seated on the throne. And of course, this is a vision of God as king on a throne. And after he sees this king on the throne whose, hem of his garment fills the entire temple, and he's high and lifted up, you have seraphim flying all around him and just saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And um, so this vision of God as this holy king strikes Isaiah so deeply that after he sees this vision, he says, woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips and live among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the king. That's from Isaiah himself. And so Isaiah is struck by the holiness of God as king and recognizes that God as this holy king is about to bring just purifying judgment across his people, across the world, because as a holy God, he must hold the nations accountable. But this holy God as king isn't just only a holy king, he's also a saving king. And you see this develop in Isaiah 40 and 52. We see this promise of the gospel where it says, get up, O Zion, on a high mountain and proclaim the good news. What is the good news? It's behold your God, behold, he comes with might, etc. And then in Isaiah 52, a very similar scene where you have this person whose feet are like the good are blessed as being a bearer of the gospel. And what does this gospel messenger say? He says, your God reigns, your God rules. And the picture here is of God coming and ruling and bringing comfort to his people and saving his people. And so there's very much this sense of God is not just a judging king, a king who brings judgment, but also a king who will save and fight for his people. But as God kind of carries out his mission to establish his kingdom as king in this world, we see a number of what I've called in that book lead agents that God acts through to establish his mission. One of those lead agents we see in Isaiah 9, Isaiah 11, Isaiah 16, Isaiah 32, is that there is going to be a king from the line of David who will be endowed with the Spirit of God and will be granted such wisdom that he'll be able to bring justice and righteousness to the most vulnerable and poor among them. And he will bring in this kind of beautiful era of peace, where what you see envisioned is like a lion hanging out and dwelling with the lamb. So God's mission in establishing his kingdom in part will come through a lead agent of a suffering or I'm sorry, of a Davidic king. In 40 to 55, you see a slightly different vantage point on the agent that God uses here. Um, and what we see is not the word king used, instead, you see the word servant. And God here, as he carries out his mission in the world of establishing his kingdom, we're told that he is raising up a servant. And this servant is going to have a mission that is going to leave the servant saying in Isaiah 49, I've labored for nothing. And you see that the servant is described as kind of despised by rulers, etc. But God says to the servant, it's too small of a thing that I've raised you up simply to restore the tribes of Jacob. In fact, I'm going to make you a light to all nations. And as we see in Isaiah 49 and then into chapter 50, and then most culminatingly in Isaiah 53, we see that the way the servant carries out his work is much like that of a priest. He will suffer, and in his suffering, he will sprinkle many nations. So you see this servant being raised up in this sort of priestly role who's going to bring atonement so that those who have been previously under judgment for sin will now be forgiven through the work of this suffering servant. And then finally, we see God, another lead agent that God the King uses in Isaiah 61, which is he anoints the messenger. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim the good news, etc. And from a Christian perspective, we see all three of these so beautifully come together in Jesus Christ. We see Jesus as the one who's hoped for from the line of David, who, with the Spirit upon him, that shoot from the stump of Jesse. We see Jesus as the suffering servant who bore the sins of many. And we see Jesus in Luke 4 quote from Isaiah 61, showing he's the eschatological messenger, that eschatological prophet. So in Reformed circles, there's the category of Jesus as prophet, priest, and king. And I think you see some semblance of that in Isaiah as God works through kind of the office of a king in Isaiah 9 and 11, through the office of the kind of prophet priest in Isaiah 49 and 53, and then also through Jesus as that eschatological prophet. But finally, when we think about another thread, if we keep kingship in view, is if God's going to establish a kingdom, what are the people or the community of the kingdom supposed to look like? And the answer is they're supposed to look a lot like their king. If God cares about justice, which he does, he says, I love justice in the book, his people are those who are supposed to be pursuing justice. If God is someone in the book who is portrayed as somebody who redeems, God's people are to be known as the redeemed. They've experienced God's redemption. If God shows himself to be the ruler over all the kingdoms in the earth, he's a God who's worthy of trust. If God is a king not just of Israel, but of all nations, the kingdom community should look like the people from across the entire globe. So here we see then that kingdom theme helping us link together God as the king who brings about his kingdom purposes through these lead agents and aiming to create a new community. And where's the realm of this kingdom? You could think of Zion as this kind of central hub from which the king reigns. But ultimately, that's just a pointer to a new heaven and a new earth where the entire world is the dominion of our king. As Isaiah 66 says, heaven is my throne and the earth is the footstool of my feet. You see God as the king over all. He's going to make a new heaven and a new earth within which he reigns, and his people experience blessing and live as his people.
So do you like the traditional identification of Isaiah as the fifth gospel? Do you think there's a lot to that?
Absolutely. There's a ton to that. And it's just so beautiful, as we've just seen, and how this good news is so clear that Isaiah prophesies about finds such fulfillment clearly in the person of Jesus Christ. So I know that the New Testament authors saw a lot of the gospel anticipated in the Psalms and in other parts, but I really think the way that Isaiah particularly is able to capture this hope for a king and this hope for a suffering servant, I think really are just um, central to the early church's ability to articulate the wonderful work God has done in Jesus Christ and the
Amen.
gospel.
So, Andy, you've written this book here, the book of Isaiah and God's Kingdom, but expand on
Yeah,
some of this. You've written some other books as well. You can mention some of those or other resources that you might point people to, perhaps at various levels of intensity, and to
yeah,
help them understand Isaiah.
yeah. Great question. So, Book of Isaiah and God's Kingdom, as you mentioned, has really been useful for people. You know, it's written through the lens of biblical theology, where I'm trying to kind of articulate kind of a unity around God's kingship and try to work that out in a kingdom way. Another kind of angle at an attempt to provide an entry point for reading Isaiah is a book called Discovering Isaiah. It's a book published with Erdman's and SPCK. What that book gives is, in our previous video, we talked about a kind of the story that Isaiah tells. And I've tried to tell four kind of that story in four different phases. It provides kind of historical background on the book. And then I trace 6 different themes in there that are kind of packaged just in different ways from what I had in the book of Isaiah and God's Kingdom. And I've heard from a number of people they found Discovering Isaiah to be really, really useful. And one thing I would just say in terms of the book of Isaiah, even having a helpful study Bible in front of you can really go a long way, especially when you're trying to get a feel for historically what's going on as you're reading a particular passage. All of a sudden, things that are a bit obscure can kind of fall into place in terms of what the prophet is saying.
What study Bibles would you recommend, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say all of them are wonderful. I used to have a sense, oh, study Bibles, can we trust them? But I've gotten to know like a lot of the people who write the study Bible notes, and I'm like, these are really great scholars and wonderful people. The NIV study Bible that was edited by Nasali and Carson is a good one. My colleague John Walton has a cultural background study Bible, and I actually find that I'll use that from time to time because they'll have little insights that are primarily revolving around historical elements. That's edited by Walton and Keener. Those are kind of the two that I've seen used, but I've heard good things about the ESV study Bible, and but I think often one of the barriers for people reading Isaiah is the historical side. So I just make sure whatever study Bible you're going to get, it's going to be able to give some of that historical information for the different prophecies.
Yeah, good word. Well, Andy, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for watching. And remember to keep it clear and focus on Christ.